Welcome to the People of AI podcast, showcasing inspiring people with interesting stories in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm Ashley Oldacre. Let's jump right in. This podcast is sponsored by Google. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. Hi everyone, Ashley here. I am honored to be hosting two very special guests from Switzerland, my home country. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. J'ai l'honneur d'interviewer deux invités très spéciaux qui viennent de la Suisse. On va continuer notre programme en anglais, mais merci de votre attention et merci de vous inscrire à ce podcast. All right, we're going to jump in with learning a little bit about Anthony Masure. Anthony Masure is an associate professor and dean of research at Geneva University of Art and Design, HEAD, Genève. As a practice-based tech critic, he aims to understand and shape how emerging technologies can craft a more sustainable future through design. His research is currently focused on artificial intelligence, blockchain, and gaming. He is the author of the essays Design and the Digital Humanities and Artificial Design, Creation versus Machine Learning. He is also a co-founder of the research journal Back Office. Bienvenue, Anthony. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Ashley.
Douglas Edric Stanley is an American-born artist working principally in the field of new media, where he explores the complex intersections of algorithms and aesthetics. At once artist, designer, curator, developer, and theoretician, he documents the means by which various disciplines are progressively being transformed by the algorithmization of the world. Active in the scene of video games and experimental forms of play, he co-founded with Antonin Fourneau the Hydra monster otherwise known as Enyaroff. His current research is concerned with writing systems and the manner in which playable non-linear narratives can model the real. Douglas Edric Stanley has organized numerous workshops related to creative coding and experimental game design for museums, nonprofits, universities, and art schools. As an artist, he has participated in several exhibitions related to digital art. Welcome, Douglas. Bienvenue. We're so happy to have you both.
Merci.
Okay, so we would love to hear a little bit about your story, your origin story. So, Anthony, we'd love to start with you.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. I'm from Paris or nearby. And funny thing, I never attended a tech course. So maybe it's important for your listener. I did a fashion school in Paris at the time because I failed to attend a master degree in graphic design. But during this master, I started to study jewelry, fashion, and luckily, I was able to launch my own company at the time, a jewelry company. And I was mostly focused on the communication part and the website part. So I started to code my own website to sell my product online. And progressively, I discovered what was HTML, these strange things. And more, I was interested about interaction and design. And a few years after, I did a PhD in Paris Sorbonne.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the relationship between code and design because I started to teach. And the faculty wanted me to teach Photoshop. But for me, it was strange to have a course named under a software. You know, it's not painting, it's Photoshop. It's not the same thing at all. So I started to wonder myself, okay, what does it mean for the creation to be framed under the name of the software? So that was my starting point, and progressively I moved to critical theory, digital studies, software studies. At the time, in the mid-2000s, it was not often the case in France to talk about software as a cultural product. So that was my starting point. And I moved to AI several years ago, around 2017, with the launch in France of the smart speakers, such as Amazon Echo. And as not a graphic designer, because I'm not a graphic designer, but as someone who interested about graphic design, there was a paradox because you speak to an object, so you don't interact with the object through a visual interface, but with your voice. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of a black box. And I started to study how does it work, what does it mean for the creation, and of course it's based on AI technologies. So that was my starting point as a few years before ChatGPT.
The pattern that I'm seeing with you, Anthony, is it's really you really want to understand how things work, and so your entrée into this technology was really using the products themselves and figuring out how they work, and I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, my question was about the software and the creativity relationships, because software is it a tool? Is it a prosthesis? Is it an apparatus? Is it something else? That was my question at the time. And in a way, it's the same question about AI. But AI are a new kind of software, but they are not tools. But maybe we will go further later about it.
We will. I'd love to turn to Douglas and hear your story.
It's interesting talking to, I mean, I don't know where physically you are right now, but I grew up in the Bay Area. So I grew up in Los Altos Hills, if you know.
That's where I live.
There you go. Yeah, so I grew up in the 70s. And my dad worked for Hewlett Packard, and a lot of the neighbors were sort of kind of the founders of a lot of these sort of, there was even like Nobel Prize people in the neighborhood. And so it was this sort of like big brainy smart people neighborhood. And there was a lot of the early technologies. So even before the Apple IIs and all that, even as just as a child, we were using all sorts of machines. And my first experience with a machine was a TTY machine, which was these teletype machines where there wasn't even a screen. It was a paper roll with a typewriter, and they would connect up to a mainframe over at Stanford. And I was sort of a guinea pig at my school where they put me in front of various games and mathematical things and whatever. So I was one of those sort of, Silicon Valley kids who saw all sorts of technology, and like most kids, was really into games. I saw some of since a friend's dad was taking care of the EEPROMs for Atari, we saw a lot of sort of open circuits with wires coming out of them and joysticks plugged in, and we would have a lot of fun playing a lot of the early prototypes of games. So I grew up in that whole hacker culture world, but then in my teens got really into film and into art in general, and eventually literature. And for me, Silicon Valley was just sort of a desert wasteland. And San Francisco wasn't enough for me, so I moved to Paris. It's kind of a choice. Do I go to New York or do I go all the way over? And the Berlin Wall had just fell down. I'd spending a lot of time in Berlin and Amsterdam, and so I decided to stay in Paris. And I wasn't really into technology at the time. I basically went to Paris to study with a philosopher and ended up with some really interesting philosophers. And it was while studying philosophy that I kind of looped back to the question of what at the time was the fancy word was, for example, hypertext. I mean, I was basically when in philosophy is the post-structuralist, postmodernist, post-structuralist, whatever you want to call it, world of critical thinking. And I realized that there was this really interesting space in between image and text and thinking, and sort of, so using epistemology to try to understand how technology, in a sense, reflects a culture, reflects thinking, what it means to think about a world, and the artifacts that we use, including technology and also art, become really interesting ways into that culture. And so that led me back to what I thought I had left behind me, which was all that sort of technology stuff. And then from there ended up so I was in some labs. I started working at the Pompidou Center as an assistant for a really wonderful group that was the La Revue Virtuelle, where they were sort of cataloging a lot of the interesting digital art up into that to that time. And then from that lab experience, I ended up at a school and a laboratory in the south of France, in Aix-en-Provence, which is this tiny little art school, but historically a very important art school, where basically a lot of the early foundations of what became bioart had already been laid down in the 80s. So for me, I got there in 1997, 98. They were already thinking about how art connected up with technology, but also cognition in general. So they were really trying to open up thinking about art and all of that. And so that led me into robotics and programming and all sorts of other crazy stuff. Yeah, so a long sort of strange trajectory that led me back to the questions of technology, but from within an art context, a creation context, let's say.
So thank you for sharing. I'm hearing in your story, Douglas, a real connection between thinking, critical thinking, understanding and evaluating the world that we're in and how that ties into technology and how different technology has influenced the way of thinking, the way of communicating, and how this creates this loop between the technology and how it influences our thinking and how our thinking then influences the technology itself. And so it sounds like throughout your entire career, the connecting thread has been really observing and studying the ways that technology and our thinking have been looped in together and creating this feedback loop throughout the evolution of technology itself.
It's what Anthony was saying earlier about software and creation. It's sort of the question of where is the tool, where is the artifact, where is the creation process. As soon as you see it as a loop, you can think of it in cybernetics. They were back in the day, they were thinking about loops.
Yeah.
But it's also cybernetics, and then you can try and move beyond cybernetics, but at least it's an interesting idea of these, sorry to speak like a programmer, but it's these recursion loops where sort of the output is getting fed back into the input. And there's something interesting about how culture, technology, software, creation, it's these intermeshed loops. So working in art labs, art schools, teaching, for me has been a really wonderful and very free space to explore a lot of these questions that we're now talking about today around AI and how this is going to affect culture or how it already affects culture.
Since we're on this topic of critical thinking, I'd like to actually maybe dive deep into that and have you both talk a little bit about these concepts before we jump into sort of the challenges of the challenges that we see. Let's maybe set the stage for what critical thinking really is, because I think sometimes in such a fast-paced world that we live in today, the time that we have and even the value for being able to stop and really think about these things, I think becomes less. And so I'd love to take us into sort of the state of critical thinking and technology today, and if you want to highlight that with some historical context, which you kind of already did, feel free to do that. So let's start with that.
Tech faces a huge list of challenges because, for example, it's like in tech as there is no past. For example, if you take the metaverse hype, it's like there was not before a lot of sci-fi books, a lot of video games, a lot of artistic piece of art, and so on. And it's like it never exists. But to understand what happens today, it involves a lot of knowledge in the art fields, in the literature, also technical skills, in order to understand. Otherwise, we are stuck in the present, as the future is always happen. But that's the motto of the Silicon Valley, I know. They sell the future, not the past. But to shape a better future, we really need to know the past.
I think I'd love to hear from both of you about what is critical thinking and why is it important? We'll just start there. And I would define critical thinking as the ability to not take something at face value and look at something and think twice about it. The way that we're setting our technology up today has a ton of value. I'm not dismissing that at all. But I think the way in which we're going to continue a really good relationship with technology is by strengthening the critical thinking skill set and mindset so that we are not taking what the technology is giving us, but we're still maintaining this interactive loop, right, of giving feedback. I think your work on really thinking about critical thinking and putting it to the forefront is really important. So I'd love to hear both of your opinions about that. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's epistemology. It's about how humans get to the type of thinking that they have. But you can also do this exact same, ask the exact same questions through anthropology, and through our media design master's program is very much about digital anthropology, looking at how people use technology. And I come from that philosophical tradition that tends to spend a lot of time, especially when it comes to technology, to spend a lot of time thinking about time and how humans perceive time and how artifacts represent time. And there's not just one time. There's not just, the time of the clock. There's also the time when you're waiting for an appointment, or there's the time in which you're falling in love, and it's the time when you're a generative time, when you're writing something. There's all these different temporalities that we have in us. And one of the assumptions that I like to look at is how are these technologies reflecting and shifting our experience of time? What type of times are now possible? I think it's significant that in video games, for example, there's all these time loops that you're always in, which existed in cinema, but not to the degree, not of the type, not of the ilk of the current generation of video games. And since the video game is on a clock cycle, machines are all about looping clock cycles. Basically, the machine turns on and runs to infinity until there's no more electricity. So there isn't really, unlike a film or like a novel, there isn't really kind of an end to the technology. So the image of a game over had to be invented, that there would be this kind of poetic form of video games where you would be in this temporality that would be short-lived. And in the beginning, it was just to get more quarters out of the kids, and I was one of those kids. But when you play on a PlayStation, there's a lot of these longer, especially when Nintendo started creating their consoles in the 80s, you get these really longer, beautiful time loops where you die and retry and all these sort of figures. And those are interesting new ways of thinking. Those are all fascinating.
Well, critical thinking, it's maybe about Douglas mentioned anthropology, but also sociology, philosophy. It's in short, it's not about only programming and not only about mathematics. It's way more broad. We miss a lot of things if we reduce tech to technical skills.
If I could just add, it is absolutely the case today with AI, that you need a really diverse set of skills to work with the current and the upcoming generation of AI.
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing you both highlight an assumption that I have, which I didn't realize until now, which is that, I think I was looking at technology as sort of this other thing, but you're right. It is already combining all of these other concepts of anthropology, sociology, critical thinking, immersed into it as well.
Just look at how you wake up in the morning and how you go to bed. Just, what buttons are you pushing?
Exactly.
It's going deep into your psyche. The screens, the machines, the algorithms, they're deep in there.
That's why I was going back to this concept of critical thinking being super important, because it is easy for these things to... And maybe my approach is I'm coming at it from this abrupt, no, I'm going to fight this and I don't want this. But it sounds like...
That's almost an impossible proposition.
Okay.
It's the whole, can the fish know that it's in water?
Right.
We're a part of this, historical consciousness.
Right, but we're also in an industry where we're making we know the people that are making the water and that are influencing the water. And so It's, how much control do we have to influence the water that we're swimming in?
See, the two of us, we're in a lucky place because we're a little bit at a tangent of industry, right? So we're doing research, we're working with industry, different types of industry outside of technology. Here in Switzerland is great because we just did something with around watches and all sorts of interesting industries that are kind of tangentially related. But also, we're in art and design. And so, yeah, we maybe don't have the same sort of focus, I think, that you might.
AI now is able to generate images, summaries. It's able to generate all kinds of things that typically were reserved for the realm of the artists and designers in the art field. And so what are some of the concerns that you're seeing with this technology today?
We hear a lot of things. Everybody can become an artist or a designer. But for me, it's a big mistake because to become an artist or a designer, you have to convince people that you are an artist or a designer. If you are able to generate a picture of a work of art, it's not a work of art because it needs a museum, a gallery, or a critic, or someone, and more probably several people, to believe in you. It's a matter of belief in a way. But can you generate belief? It's really difficult. You can generate things who seems to be work of art, but to generate beliefs, for me, it's not possible because you need context, you need a deep understanding of this field, of the history. So for me, the biggest mistake is to think that everybody can become a designer or an artist. But it doesn't mean that this profession will not change. It will accelerate some workflows. Maybe it will lower some also at the same time. And one of maybe the biggest concern is about the value, the perception of the value. So for me, it's about value chains. Creativity as a chain of value. And how can you convince people that your work still have a value? Because at the same time, it seems, even if it's not true, that everyone can generate same results in a very short frame. So for designer, it means that they will, as in the past, but maybe more and more, to find some arguments in order to convince people that their work have a value and you should pay me to do this, even if it looks more and more easy, because it's not about the result, but it's about the process. In every design work, it's not only about producing something, but mostly about analyzing something, analyzing a context, people, habits, issues, and so on, in order to produce a good work. And if you reduce the work of the designer to the production, you miss maybe the most important part. As Douglas said before, we need methods in anthropology, sociology, and so on. But how can you generate these things? For now, for me, it's too difficult. You can accelerate some parts of the production phase, but not the brief, the brief challenges or the challenge of the brief.
The problem at hand that the designer needs to address. Not necessarily solve, but to think and help the client think about what their problem is.
Exactly. Most of the time, the client doesn't know what are his needs or her needs. And the first work is to formulate the problem, because most of the time it's not written at the beginning or not well.
The brief is the job description, the hey, designer XYZ, can you help us? We need to design something. Here is our context. We're a museum, we're a city, we're a train station. We want to work with kids. We want to work with intergenerationally. We have some sort of a thing that we're trying to do. And a good designer will come in and think about that thing somewhat holistically. You can't think about it in its totality, but you try and think of how things relate to one another. And the word I think Anthony used there is context. And it takes a while to understand what the context is. And so there you need something like, again, this is methodology that we're teaching right now in our first semester of our master students who've just come in. We're teaching them to understand, to define what their context is. And for each student, for the different way that they're going to answer the brief that we gave them.
Yeah, if I may add something. Design is not about solving problems. It's mostly about reframing problems.
Exactly.
So if you just put a problem as a prompt to an AI generator, it will not work well because it will not reframe the problem. It will just try to solve it based on previous materials.
Previous solutions, which come from different contexts. And so those contexts aren't your context. They're never going to be your context. They're always going to be some vanilla context. And so, they're not going to be interesting ways of reframing and re-understanding what the question that you didn't even know you were asking. That's what a good designer is answering.
What are some of the concerns that designers, artists comes to you with regards to AI? And because I think there is a lot of concern. There is a lot of justifiable, maybe, fear around being replaced, about copyright issues. So, what are the biggest concerns that you're hearing in your communities, in your fields?
With AI, we can wonder ourselves, are we doing something when we are writing a prompt, for example? Because art and design, most of the time, you change yourself when you are doing the process. But what process is it to using a Gen AI program? But for me, it could be a false problem because it's only a problem if you understand Gen AI as a button to a research process, and it's not a problem if it's part of a broader workflow in a way. If it's part of a broader workflow, it will be more interesting and it will change yourself. One student surprised me one day because he explained to me that he has no fear of AI because he likes to draw, and he will still like to draw after AI, which is a simple answer, but very efficient in a way. But the problem is not people will still draw after AI, but who will pay for it? Is it an hobby or is it a job? But maybe that's the main question. You can like to draw, but will you be able to sell your drawings?
So Caran d'Ache is a traditional pencil company based here in Geneva, with some of the most beautiful color utensils in the world. And when they asked us, so the brief, I reject the idea that design is inherently commercial or uncreative. In fact, I throughout my career have been more of an artist than a designer in my own personal work, but I find design to be incredibly freeing because you can go a lot deeper into a lot of the questions and you can explore a lot of different facets of sort of a question. And working with Caran d'Ache, I thought was interesting to explore specifically this question that was asked around what is the flow of creation? What you described, Anthony, as just the pleasure of drawing. And I think that's an interesting formula for creative practice. I really love this example of someone who, I don't have any problem with AI because I'm always going to love drawing. And this is what we explored with Caran d'Ache. We went back to that basic sort of proposal. What is it, just that magical thing of just taking an instrument and drawing lines and seeing those lines dance on the page? What are all those sort of like inherent physical dynamics? And then where can we inject AI into that process that doesn't break that original flow that we have in creativity? I think there's a lot of potential there to get out of the dangerous loops of the temporality of AI that optimizes human experience. And you don't want to optimize drawing. You want to get into it. I have hope that I mean, I'm a teacher, and I have to always start from the proposal that that the youth know something, have their finger on some sort of a pulse that I don't have. So there will always be something new that I don't understand yet, and these new generations can help me to see those things. And then what I can add to that is maybe that sort of slowing down, and maybe add a couple historical perspectives. It's really our job to, in a sense, I mean, we're really paid to not fall into these traps of these over optimized, because really what is the problem of AI and humanity when it gets dangerous is the humans become the maintainers of the machines. And this is what, sort of international, whatever you want to call it, late capitalism, whether you're pro or against, whatever it is, we're probably in something called late capitalism. And that's really what, that's really a lot of what happens to a lot of technology, is we kind of become the caretakers of the machines, that as long as they work good enough and we've optimized enough your work schedule, okay, now who are the maintainers of these AI machines? And as artists, we'll never accept that proposal.
Our students, most of the time, doesn't know very well how to start.
Yeah.
It's marketed as easy to use, but it's not so easy to write a prompt, to analyze and to curate between several hundreds, dozens of results, and to include Gen AI results into traditional workflows. It's not so easy. So most of the time, they don't know how to use it, how to think with it, and sometimes, and not, and often, they refuse to use it.
Why?
Most of the students did not come to the art school to push a button and have art pop out. They came to the school to develop their own craft and way of seeing the world as artists, as designers, as architects. So what they're really trying to do is they're trying to create this new perception of the world and ability to act in the world with these new tool sets, with these new ways of thinking with your hands, understanding some of the traditions that you're in, but also thinking critically about the world, and then producing artifacts, maybe producing interesting situations, dispositif, I guess is the word I'm looking for, but you can creating interesting sort of configurations, especially when what we're teaching, interactivity, you're playing with people, with humanity, with the way in which they talk to each other, interact with each other. And students don't come to push a button and have a cool output. They're interested in understanding developing their own way of working, developing what Anthony described as their own process. Because we don't create cookie cutter students. No art school on kind of like the level that we're at. We're sort of one of the, one of those sort of like higher education types of art schools where it's a trade school in a sense, but it's also each student ideally should have their own singular approach. And the AI can be a part of that. That can be a really exciting, even really interesting part of that. But that's not the original reason why you go to an art school. You go to an art school to think about what it is to create, and then it's often the people have sort of like an internal kind of a fire. And the AI almost extinguishes that because you push the button and you have like good output. And so then suddenly you start thinking, okay, well, like what is good? And,
Often it's like they are trying to convince themselves that AI doesn't exist, and they prefer attend courses of ceramics, silk screening, painting, sculpture, wood.
But some of the coolest stuff going on right now in AI is ceramics.
Exactly.
And so we were just hanging out with Vavach and Mar, who are these great designers who are designing AI in ceramics. So,
And we should not oppose them, but still it's like they try to escape the tech field or the tech mutations.
And what's your message? Is your message that's okay, or is your message like?
Oh yeah. They're youth. They're smarter than us. Come on, we're the old guys.
Well, so in your essay, Anthony, Artificial Design, Creation versus Machine Learning, you talk a lot about this concept of working with machines, working with AI versus working sort of under or against. And I'd love for you both to talk about the ways that, you mentioned some examples about these artists who are working in ceramic and how they're incorporating AI. And when we met in San Francisco at the exhibition Assembling Intelligence, Hybrid Strategies for AI Art and Design, we talked about this issue of AI being a medium versus a tool as well. And so I'd love us to just really jump into first sort of this concept of working with versus kind of against.
Yes, it's because most of the time Gen AI is used as a way to reproduce things we already know or we already do or did. It's more interesting and more difficult to create something we don't know yet.
We were specifically looking for works that were coming from almost like an explosion of different possible disciplines that could be exhibited. So painting, photography, graphic design, so sort of posters, sculpture even, sort of a whole bunch of different mediums. Yeah, and so we were looking at a diversity of mediums and a diversity of methodologies of working with AI. So there's no work in that show that has the same methodology as any other work. All are sort of their own. That's why we called it hybrid. They're their own hybrid ways of working with the technology. Sometimes it meant building or at least retraining. For example, in one of the pieces, the students were retraining their own large language models, and then turning that large language model into a tool that would prompt them to create 3D work. So they were building a large language model that would prompt them and that would give them instructions on what they should create in 3D. A photographer had sort of an ambivalent notion of how AI could be used, and almost used the prompt almost aggressively. And his prompt is put as a poem on the wall. And the title is sort of the absurdity of the piece. He was asking for a dead bird in the style of Turner, and it looks nothing like Turner. And so he thought that was interesting, the disconnect between the prompt and the result. And so all of these different sort of high sophisticated, technologically difficult strategies, especially that we had to use when we started working, at least in our master's program, we started working about 7-8 years ago. We had to do a lot of the sort of typical, probably work similar to what engineers are doing at Google, just to get a text in to be interactive, to get a large language model to be interactive. It took a lot of code and engineering and a lot of hacking. And then other stuff in the exhibition is sloppier, or just grabbing an AI where it is and just throwing it in and see what happens, and then painting that, for example. So hybrid strategies, use the AI wherever you want, plug it into your process wherever you want, and there's no single, again, no cookie cutter way of doing it right.
Yeah, we try to escape the wheel of pushing a button, then boom, have a good result. Every piece of the exhibition try to escape from this very simple method. And AI is not a new medium. It's also a kind of meta medium, as Alan Kay, if I'm right, said at the time. And maybe, Douglas, you can go on with your work between video game and cinema, but between these two mediums. So as a way of thinking or seeking, looking for a new medium between these two old medium.
That's fascinating. I love the potential explosion of creativity and doing things differently feels limitless now with AI as a medium, as a tool as well. I did want to wrap up just by asking you both about what it means to be a person of AI today, which ties in nicely with all of the things that we've talked about. What does it mean to be a person of AI today really stems from this concept of historically AI was reserved for the researchers and the folks who are really building the technology. And then it moved on to the field of developers who started building things with the technology. And now it's everywhere. It's on your smartphones. It's in, Google Photos. You're using it whether you know it or not. And so the concept is, and it's a very open question. It's about, does it mean, that you're building? Does it mean that you're thinking about problems with AI in mind? I mean, we just don't know. There's no right answer to this, and it is just an interesting question that we're asking all of our guests this season.
As artists and designers, we are paid to break things. That's the funny part. We use bugs as a creative process. We produce new bugs also, and to be maybe that could be a conclusion, but what does it mean to be a person of AI today? For me, it will be to exist like a Janus. Maybe the myth of Janus. It's a man or woman who look both on the past and on the future. And on the past, it means using old AI, for example, because most of the time AI who are less efficient are more interesting. For example, in Swiss San Francisco, there is a poster series who used a weird 3D AI, because at the time it was the beginning of 3D AI. So it means having weird shapes with a lot of angles and bad resolution. And someone from NVIDIA saw this work during the exhibition and said to me, "It's awesome. My boss will fire me if I was doing this, but I don't know why, but I like it." But it's because it's not about how many pixels do you have, is it photorealistic or not? It's not the question at all. It's about looking from something specific, something new, like a big bug in a way. So it's been looking on the past and on the future at the same time, because you have to be aware of what is coming. For example, neural interfaces or the association between biology and design using woods or living organism to rethink computing. So if you are able to look both ways, it's a good start to be a person of AI today.
Humanity has been dreaming of AI for millennia. Generative textual systems exist before computers. So if you look at the I Ching, the Book of Changes, this is a 64 ideogram system that generates text for you based on yarrow sticks that you play. So it's not exactly rolling dice, but it's similar to rolling dice and having a sort of something that's in between an oracle and maybe a thinking machine. That's maybe a textual machine, but it still has machinic aspects to it. So there's an old dream of a sort of a non-human entity that we could interact with that could say pertinent things about our existence. So, you work with Google, people invest a lot almost spiritually into that little text box. They ask a lot of questions about life, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we all have this sort of pareidolia where we see faces in clouds. And there is another old dream, which is that these creatures, these pseudo creatures, pseudo beings that we are somehow they accompany us, that there's a desire for some sort of an alien intelligence. There's a lot of people using this sort of language, these sort of alien intelligences. And then it's precisely the otherness of them, the strangeness of them that makes them that is fascinating for us. So I think that is also one of the current rabbits that people are chasing down the rabbit hole of AI. And then sort of the more, I guess, like pedestrian interpretation of your sentence, what it is to be a person of AI today. Well, I started working with generative text systems in the 90s. And for me, it was about storytelling. I used generative systems because I realized that it was a really interesting way to be inside an interactive story that could be visual, that could be textual, and that generative systems are not just about prompts, that you could be inside of a novel and you could be interacting with the novel, and bits of the novel could be generated as you're interacting with the novel. And I think this is a very powerful new thing that, again, is an oldish dream. I think a lot of people like me have been wanting some sort of a generative tool that could also be interactive inside of an artwork, inside of a work of art, inside of a film, inside of a game, inside of something that would be similar to like a novel or an audiobook that I'm interacting with and that's generating as I interact with it. And there's this beautiful circular feedback loop going on. I think that's an exciting possibility that's opening up. But building that is still hard. It's a technical conundrum that hasn't been resolved yet. And then it's also an emerging artistic medium that I think still needs a lot of fundamental work before it really emerges into something new.
Well, thank you both for this incredible conversation. We've covered so much. And I'm so grateful for your time and for your insights and your experience. This was a really enlightening conversation on so many levels. So merci à vous d'être venu, d'avoir partagé tout ce que vous avez partagé. C'était une conversation extraordinaire avec des choses dont j'avais jamais pensé avant. Donc merci à vous and thank you so much for coming on.
Je vous en prie.
Merci beaucoup.
If you would like to learn more about our conversation or our guests, check out the links below. Please subscribe, and if you're feeling extra generous, give us a 5-star rating. We would love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. We'll read every one. Until next time, thank you for listening.